So I very much appreciated the last presentation. I think it captures some of the things that Angie was talking about and the need to think critically and examine our actions against what the principles that we've been given. My presentation is going to be putting some of that challenge to the test and saying, okay, there are things in the health world that maybe we need to be looking at and comparing to what are Ellen White's principles and how can we continue our growth of knowledge and continue to learn and be effective as the knowledge in this field is expanding. All right, so a quote that I find very encouraging starts with, God is just as willing to restore the sick to health now as when the Holy Spirit spoke through the psalmist. And Christ is the same compassionate physician now that he was during his earthly ministry. In him there is healing balm for every disease, restoring power for every infirmity. And I think when we're dealing with people there's a lot of people that are stuck in their health issues and don't have answers. And I believe we have a Savior that still cares. He sometimes chooses to heal via anointing. He sometimes chooses to wait to heal. But I believe he is still, just as I said, he is still the same compassionate physician. And we can look at that when we're going through our own conditions, and we can trust in him, and we can commit our choices and our thought and our exploration to him, and trust that he will be beside us and care for us. My story is coming from my own personal journey where I had some very tough conditions that I went through. And I was sick in bed for a long time. I was unable to really get out of bed for several weeks because I was just tired. I didn't really have a reason why. I would as soon as I was try to exercise too much or go for a walk too much, I would be laid flat again. And so there's a long story that I went through and saying, okay, what is going on? And I went through this journey. That's a different presentation that goes more into the journey on that direction, but I'm going to share some of it. Through the agencies, and this is an interesting quote, statement that she makes, which I don't always hear taken to its logical and careful conclusions, says, through the agencies of nature, God is working. She also says some places that like the flowers don't grow of their own, but God makes them grow. And so day by day, moment by moment, to keep us alive, to build up, to restore us. When any part of the body sustains injury, a healing process is begun at once. Now, is that independent of God? Okay, Kellogg went the direction of that is God, right? No, God is working in nature. And so do we have a role in cooperating with him? Nature's agencies are set to work to restore soundness, but the power working through these agents is the power of God. So God is at work, the same compassionate physician, the same is at work in our bodies, and as we cooperate with the way he designed us and intelligently learn how our bodies work, he is there to heal us. The physician should teach his patients that they are to cooperate in the work of restoration. Okay, so how then can we cooperate with God in our healing? I think it's just a good question to be thinking about as we go through topics like this. Okay, speaking of Kellogg, one time Paulson was talking to Dr. Kellogg, and Ellen White quotes this as well. She says, "Do you know how Battle Creek Sanitarium was able to keep 5 years ahead of the medical profession?" And he says, "No, I do not." And so the question is, how did, at that time the Adventist Church was one of the leaders in the medical field. It was doing innovative stuff. It was doing things. How did that happen? And he gives, and Ellen White quotes it later on, when something was new brought out in the medical field, I knew from where? My knowledge of the spirit of prophecy, whether or not it belonged in our system. So just these principles we've been talking about, that Lorraine talked about, principles that Angie talked about, we compare things that are going on. And we have to look at what is the principles in Ellen White's system and whether or not it belonged in our system. So there are new things we can learn. We don't just stop. We don't just do, okay, what did Ellen White say? What did she do? Do we only do what she said? No, we keep learning. We keep comparing. If it did, I instantly adopted it. While the rest of the doctors were slowly feeling their way, I had 5-year head start on them. On the other hand, when the medical profession was caught up in some new fad, and there's plenty of those, if it did not fit the light we had received, I wouldn't touch it. By the time the doctors discovered their mistake, they wondered how it was that I did not get caught. So I think this definitely applies. Believe in the Lord your God, and you shall be established. Believe his prophets, and you shall prosper. Unfortunately, I think sometimes we aren't walking in the counsel and the direction that she kind of led. And we've separated the two. We've separated health from ministry. We've done a number of things. And so I think there is a calling to go back and to intelligently look at, okay, what are principles, and discuss them. I mean, there's going to be different opinions, and let's examine. So, told you a bit of my story. I don't have tons of time to go through the whole thing, but it certainly went through a lot of going to doctors, getting blood work. You're fine. Like, have you tried going to a counselor? You're stressing out too much. Like, oh wow, I must be really stressing out. A lot of different things, and it became very frustrating. It became just realizing that I wasn't going to find answers in this direction. I mean, I went through all the doctors, and I wasn't going to find answers in the standard ways. And so I began to look at, okay, what is Ellen White's principles? What is, she seems to be talking about more natural stuff than I'm seeing in the doctors. I mean, I could go into some of the challenges I ran into that was just frustrating. It's like, wow, there's got to be, she seems pointing in a different direction. Let me see if I can find out what would be going in those things. So I tried to look at some of the principles and then to look in the Adventist world around and say, okay, what are the materials? What is the materials that are created for health ministry and for on her principles that might give light or might help me or point in directions that other people like me. I was finding many other people like me in friends of mine and on the social forums. And so there's a great section that I think capitalizes for me some of the key principles that she talks about. And I'm sure you've all read it. It's great. We read it readily, commonly. But there's a lot of good stuff in this, and I feel like sometimes we stop with just one sentence or we don't really think it through. So I want to take some time and look at. So it says pure air, this is the starting, pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. And she repeatedly comes back to these, and these are core. She lays this out as kind of her cookbook, I guess you could say, her recipes. But there are things in these passages that I feel like we've kind of taken these 8 and isolated just them. It also says every person should have a knowledge of nature's remedial agency, okay, and how to apply them. So we've taken and made a lot of different things and focused our activities on these 8. And my question is there stuff in the paragraphs around there that maybe we haven't focused on as much as we possibly should have? Okay, so education in right principles. Okay, so it goes on, yes, this is the previous paragraph. The only hope of better things is in the education of the people in right principles. So what kind of education is she talking about? What kind of principles? Might that go beyond just, okay, there's diet, there's things. I mean, certainly that is part of it. To use them correctly, as she talked about, I mean, we try to educate people in how the body works, how different things. And so could a little more emphasis on understanding how does the body works. And so I have some other quotes where she says, encourages us to understand that most wonderful of organism, the human body. Carefully consider your diet. Study from cause to effect. How can we help people to think about their own conditions and the different functions in our body, and to understand and learn cause and effect and how that can inform their lifestyle. So that might be different for different people, right? I mean, you have some things, a lot of people have diabetes struggle. I have different issues than a lot of people. My issues are very different than some people, and so there's some things that are helpful for me that a lot of people, oh no, they shouldn't be doing that. I agree, you shouldn't be doing that. But there's a lot of other people like me that I've confirmed and seen research that says, well, this is actually helpful for us. So how do we study from cause to effect, not just taking it straight? Sounds like an intelligent patient involved in their health journey. So involving the patient in their analysis. Natural restoration. Let the physicians teach the people that a restorative power is not in nature, not in drugs, but in nature. So what does restorative power being in nature mean? What was she getting at? And I have a little visual clip from an image I'll show you a little bit later that's going into kind of some possibilities, like of these different processes that go in the body that are common ones that can be helpful, that can affect all kinds of different things and can be helpful to understand. And she seems to hint at different times, or at least sound similar. She goes on, disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. That sounds like a different definition of disease maybe than is commonly said. She seems to point at disease being focusing on the body's actions, and rather than it being, I don't know, I think that could be fleshed out more, but certainly the question of what disease is certainly a discussion that goes on in what we will get to of some different views of medicine and how we treat it. Do we start with symptoms? Do we take a bunch of symptoms, line them up, and say, okay, these symptoms have this label. Is that what disease is? And a lot of times I've gone through things where, if you have such and such, we get labels for them, but we don't really look at what causes are. And so there may be many people, is it helpful? Sure, it's helpful, but sometimes it isn't, because we're so focused on the symptom, and some people with the same cause have many different, it depends on where you're weak. If you have weak skin, okay, if you have celiac, if you have weak skin, it's going to show up in your skin. If you have weak neurons, it's going to show up in your brain. So the cause is more important than the symptom or the label. Okay, so in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. That sounds time-consuming. That sounds difficult. But she seems to suggest it's possible. And I would suggest that if we have a loving Savior that we talked about earlier, that we can trust God to help us and guide us. Unhealthful conditions should be changed. Conditions. Have any of you heard of environmental medicine? So environmental medicine looks at, what do we have done to our environment? Flint, Michigan, all this lead in the water, and all these kids, they are going to be dealing with things the rest of their lives. And there's going to be kids there's certainly are people that have been exposed to stuff that didn't know they were in Flint. They didn't know it wasn't caught. And so the rest of their lives, there's going to be these mysteries going on. And okay, well, why do I have this? Why do I struggle here? Why? And so isn't it part of our calling? This is my burden I think as part of our calling of Christ, to follow in Christ, to take up the challenges around us of people's complex lives and say, how can we prayerfully help them intelligently examine and think through that causal analysis? Does that require caution? Does that require teaching? Does that require examination and comparison with science and good doctors and all that? Yes, but yeah, I believe it's a need, because medicine, money is not always there. So They require people that care. Okay, wrong habits corrected. Certainly that's lifestyle medicine. That is key, and that's the big challenge that we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources focusing on, and that's key to ministry. Nature is to be assisted in her efforts to expel impurities. That sounds like an interesting challenge. How does the body detoxify? How would I understand? Are there things that can get in the way of that? What are the processes? How do I support these processes? So it goes on and says, it is the duty of every person to inform himself into the regard to the laws of life. They should understand the functions of the various organs. What are those functions? What was she getting at, or what would be logical conclusions or correlations? What are the laws of life? Could functions and laws and those things include things like hormone balances? I mean, if you look at, if I have high estrogen, that causes all kinds of things throughout the Bible, the body. If I have, my cortisol is, if I have cortisol dysregulation, that causes all kinds of things. Oxidation levels, intestinal permeability, alkaline acid balance. I mean, can you go too far with these? Yes. Just like everything in science, one has to be careful. Microbiome diversity, liver detoxification, blood sugar balance, lymphatic drainage. There's plenty of evidence that each of these things has a cause and an effect, and that one can take time and learn and teach people. I believe there's plenty of evidence you can teach people laws and how to look for ways to adjust their lifestyle and grow in their knowledge. They should study the influence of the mind upon the body and the body upon the mind. So it's a two-directional relationship, right? When we have, what does she talk about? She talks about leftover cares, worries, concerns, and how that drains the body. And I mean, you can see direct evidence of that in the science and how it goes through. Your adrenals is one thing, other processes, I don't remember all the terms, but sometimes learning those terms can be helpful because the cascade of things breaks down in a different place for different people. And so learning those laws and how they are governed. And the reverse, the body upon the mind. Often, that's a whole other presentation, but not just labeling based on the symptoms of your mind, but looking for how your body could be producing what's happening in the mind. It's two-directional. Okay, so there is this thing, I'm using the term functional. I cannot tell you the whole history right now, but I believe this is a term that came to light in the 1990s or so by a number of doctors that were trying to, they're not Adventists, they're not Christians, but they're sincerely looking for this issue. We have, in the medical world, you have a lot of different specializations, right? You have the hand doctor, the neurologist, and you go to one, and they say, oh, well, they do some tests on one thing, but there's not people looking at the whole thing. A lot of people I know, and myself included, have issues going on that aren't just in one place. It's the issue, okay, well, my dad had issues in his skin. The issue wasn't his skin. Luckily, his skin doctor, I forget the name, dermatologist, thank you, knew what to look for and helped him. So there's plenty of discussion that goes on, but functional is specializing on what are the functions that go on through the whole body and looking for ways to naturally look at the cause, look for, and trace to solution. So just to break down some of what kind of the differences might be, and this could be debated or discussed, but functional medicine, the ideal is it tries to be health-oriented, whereas conventional medicine looks for a disease, looks at your symptoms, tries to put a disease on it, and then often goes towards surgery or drugs. And not that there's not a time for that, but it's a different approach. And they each have their time and place. Functional medicine tends to be more patient-centered. At the functional medicine, you spend tons of time at the beginning learning the whole patient history and learning who is this patient and what is going on with their life. And whereas conventional medicine, the doctor is the expert, he has 5 to 10 minutes. You feel sorry for him because he has to give you something and get his insurance in 5 to 10 minutes, and so what can he do? He's got this, he's under this system and he has to accomplish it. So functional medicine looks a lot at biochemical individuality and that we are all different. Let me just jump forward here while I'm thinking about it. Okay, so there's some interesting quotes in Ellen White that focus on biochemical individuality, which I just found interesting. This one is interesting. It says, "It is impossible to make an unvarying rule to regulate everyone's habits, and no one should think himself a criteria for all." Like, oh wow. So not all people can eat the same things. Foods that are palatable and wholesome to one person, so she goes on and talks about maybe distasteful or even harmful to another. You know, I can't eat gluten. It's great for some people. Ellen might love whole wheat bread. That'll kill me. Some cannot use milk. Others thrive on it. So some people should eat milk. Some persons cannot digest beans. She couldn't, I believe. And coarser greens, which maybe is talking about celiac. And there's some other more interesting quotes where she even talks about some other stuff. It's like, oh wow, really? That some people should eat that stuff? Wow. One of them is milk and eggs. And so there's conditions. Person who has blood-making organs are feeble. So in a specific condition, when something is happening in the body, and we can hopefully come to understand that and adjust our recommendations or help people think through their lives. Okay, so let's go back here. Holistic versus specialized. We talked about how conventional medicine specializes in all these parts, and they don't always communicate well. Functional medicine tries to look at the whole picture, and then, you know, it tries. Functional medicine, this says it's cost effective. It can be expensive, but it is a different type of expensive. If I go to a normal doctor, it may be cheaper because insurance will cover it, but I may have that problem. If I hadn't stuck with what I was doing, I would still be having the same problems, and probably worse because of the drug effects now, and that would be 10 years later, and I would have spent way more money than going back and doing some of the tests that weren't covered by functional medicine and getting to some root cause. Looks at underlying cause, diagnosis based on symptoms, more preventative approach, early detection of disease. So they try to be early. A high touch, and that is something that functional medicine often does a good job of, is developing a relationship and becoming personally, learning the story and making that a key part of the interaction. I should have put the slide here. There are definitely some weaknesses. So next time I'll move the slide here. There are definitely some weaknesses, and we'll come to those in a bit. But I'm not saying that there's no strengths, or that it's all roses. So we'll come to those in a bit. Our medical missionaries should be given the opportunities to know context. This is a quote by W.C. White. So that's not Ellen White, but it is based on some comments that she made. And so we were just talking about functional medicine. I'm saying, oh, there's something good to be looked at here. This is both a statement of encouragement and warning, I think. It says our medical missionaries should be given the opportunity to know the very best things done by, and then she lists all these different things in her time. And she includes homeopaths and osteopaths, or he includes. Now, does that mean we should accept everything they say they do and everything they believe? No, I sure hope not, because there's a number of things that are done and believed, including by allopaths, that she disagreed with and that others do. So we should act based on principle, but none of these systems should be adopted as compromising all that our physicians need to know, nor should the name, this is interesting, of any of these systems be adopted as the sign of our order. So that includes functional medicine, but I think it also includes allopathy. So to me, we go by principle and prayerfully looking for God's leading and what we should be working with. Neither are our medical men to give the credit or the honor of the results of the labors under God to any man or group of men or any locality or to any system. So although it sounds like he is building this based on some Ellen White's principles, we should definitely look at what other people are doing, but we need to be doing everything based on God as our guide and not another system. Okay, so while we are looking at this system and some of the things that they're talking about, and we will talk about its weaknesses, we talked about biochemical individuality, patient-centered. We hinted at that they've put an emphasis on the mind, the relation between the mind and the body, and they go into depth of analysis. We have some diagrams, like all the different ways and all the different organ systems where when you think certain things, that affects inflammation. It affects your stress response. It actually affects your gut secretions. And each of these has a cause and effect, and tracing that cause and effect both backwards and forwards can be very important. So to that point, we need to understand and learn how these organ systems are interacting, and what are some of the axes. There's the brain-gut axes. There's different things that are key pathways of cause and effect throughout the body. Then health as a positive vitality. That's an interesting word, which has an interesting history, which would be good to follow up. Ellen White uses that a number of times herself. There's people that took it the wrong direction and made it kind of this energy medicine, basically, is what it sounded like to me. But she seems to point at it more as being these vital this metabolic reserve, this energy reserve that you have in different things you have in your body, and adrenals is one of them, hormone balance, things that your body has the ability to adapt to challenges. Something happens and it's like, yeah, I stepped on that rock wrong. Well, I'm strong enough to just balance myself out. I'm okay. But as I get older, or if I have a weaker foot, I step a little bit and I break. And so building that vitality, strength, looking for weaknesses, not waiting till it becomes a disease, not saying, it's now a disease, looking for, what are ways that you might be weak? And that could be all parts of different things in the body. And how do we build vitality? And again, metabolic reserve, organ reserve. Okay, so this is back to that diagram. We kind of talked about much of this, and when we look at the idea of this diagram is that functional medicine tries to look at each of these are important, but we need to make sure we're looking at the roots. And as Adventists, we have often focused on the roots, and it's a wonderful thing. We focus on sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress, resilience, trauma, environment. We focus on most of those things. And it's good. The question is, could we benefit from helping people to understand how these roots are being processed through these core systems, and tracing these cause-effect relationships, and looking at way to how can you recognize, and if you have a real problem, start testing for and start looking for the biological indicators that say, you seem to have a low cortisol response. That could mean such and such, and you need to understand how to adjust your lifestyle, support your stress response, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is where functional medicine focuses, is that center part, certainly counseling and adjusting your lifestyle, because exercise. Is exercise good? Is it always good? Oh, it isn't. But I thought exercise was good. I mean, when you have adrenal issues, which I had like when I tried to walk, I had a low adrenals. And when I finally tested them, I was way down at the bottom of the range. Like, no wonder I had a problem. I could easily overdo it. And so learning how that system worked and what stressed it and how I could support it and how, from brain, body, eating, supplements, all these different types of things was very core for helping me to recover, or at least to support that process. Okay, so some key imbalances that they look at. Hormonal imbalances, unstudying the hormones, that has a huge effect on your brain, your body, all kinds of different things, as do neurotransmitters. Oxidation redux and mitochondriopathy, how you create energy, the oxidative balance that goes on in the mitochondria and other places that can affect all kinds of things throughout the body, cancer and energy levels and etc. Detoxification. How does your body detoxify? What can get in the way? There's a number of people, so there's whole systems that are learning how these key enzyme pathways work that manage, ideally, the enzymes that do detoxification and things such as glutathione. Okay, so there's glutathione as a key one, and different people have things that block that one, and so that's a key one that looking at what's going on to help your body keep that recharged, regulated, and liver detox, bile excretion, etc. How do we understand and support our detoxification pathways? Immune inflammatory imbalances. I mean, if you've studied, like, inflammation is the cause of everything, it seems like. It just affects everywhere. And so what are the causes of inflammation? What are the ways we can support it? What are the ways we can adjust? If we have a recognized high inflammation level, how can we adjust our lifestyle, adjust our diet, adjust, etc.? Digestive, absorptive, and gut microbiological imbalances. There's tons of research right now focusing on this, and so many things that get affected by our gut imbalance. Angie did a great presentation on how there's things you wouldn't think that could be affected by your gut biome, and it's bidirectional. There's things in the body that can affect the gut, and gut that affects the brain and the body, and it's certainly worth looking at, and can affect your detoxification. There's a gut-liver axis, and it goes through. So learning that there is this, and what you can do, and then when you need to look for advice and where you can look for advice, I think is an important thing. Structural imbalances. I mean, if you have some muscles or joints that are messed up, that's going to be a stressor. I mean, if I'm turned a little bit, I mean, that's going to be a stressor. That's going to affect my adrenals. That's going to affect my muscles. It's going to affect my brain. I'm going to be upset. And so whatever imbalances, whether musculoskeletal or cellular, have their cause and effect, and we talked about that. So similar correlations or similar causative things. One condition can be caused by many imbalances. I mean, is obesity caused by one thing? Is it just my diet? I mean, if I have inflammation, that can contribute to it. If I have hormones out of balance, if I have genetic issues, if I have diet and exercise. So recognizing that there's a detective process that can be helpful, and looking for weaknesses where if I see several different conditions and they have common possible imbalances, maybe I need to start there. Maybe I need to support my inflammation levels, and maybe my obesity and my stress and depression will go away or improve. I can help my body heal itself. And inflammation can affect all these different areas. Similarly, depression can be affected by many different causes, and again, inflammation. Another one on inflammation. One that I'm giving another presentation on, which was key for my healing, was understanding the stress response, specifically the hypothalamus pituitary axis, and how that ties into your body's adaptive reserve, ability to respond to challenge on multiple levels, not just brain, so many types of stressors, physical, biochemical, and mental, emotional, are challenge this stress response. And so looking both how do we support that, and looking backwards to say, how can I reduce some of the stressors? How can I recognize it? How can I improve my thought patterns? How can I trust in God better? How can I get more sleep? How can I, etc. Can be helpful. If we carefully preserve the life force, and keep the delicate mechanism of the body in order. The result is health. But if the vital force, she uses that term, it's interesting. So what does she mean by that and how does she use it? Is too rapidly exhausted, the nervous system borrows power for present use from its resources of strength, and one organ is injured, all are affected. So in this training that I went to that is built a lot around the adrenals as kind of your starting point and your HPA axis, it kind of talks about, in this language, he actually uses some language that sounds a lot like what Ellen White does and doesn't do it in the New Age, except for once in a while. He's not perfect. But he says things that sound a lot like her and point to things which I think are what she was getting at. So one of the things oh, I got some diagrams or some animations. One of the things he talks about is how our HPA axis and other metabolic reserves pathways associated with that, there's cause and effect relationships bidirectional between each thing. I mean, if I have a glucose imbalance, that is a stressor. I mean, when my sugar spikes up and then dives, I get depressed. I go through. I can't sleep. It'll bounce over to other parts of the body, and in turn, those can affect others. So there kind of begins this cascade where a stress response starts in one place or several places, and once that reaches a critical threshold, then that domino starts going to the next place, And by the time you get to, that may start way before there are symptoms. You may not recognize that there's something going on. So it may cascade, and so by the time you get to disease and symptoms, the causes may be several cascades away. And so looking for causes before you start saying, okay, what disease is this? But looking backwards and say, okay, looking at disease is helpful. Let's support the body at the limbs. Let's back up and say, okay, where can we see indicators of weakness? Where can we see indicators of challenge and say, how can I support that? How can I decrease the domino effect going on and see that? So I think her quote is very interesting. If we carefully preserve the life force, if we take that approach and think about our duty to steward our bodies, our systems, our organ systems, our brains, our thoughts, our things we eat, and the way it ripples, domino effects throughout our organ systems, and do that in a way that preserves this vitality, this reserve, this ability to deal with change, and whether that be hormonal, blood sugar, or other types of stress. I think is a key thing, and to do it intelligently and to teach people how to do it intelligently in ways that go beyond maybe things that we normally focus on. So diving into some of these. One of the things that we do in our training is they have this questionnaire that people go through, and it's very interesting that looks for indicators of weakness in all of these different areas. And so you can see kind of visually afterwards how, oh, I'm weakest in the endocrine function and also in neural. Okay, so then that can give me a focus on, okay, what systems and what things are related to that, and start doing some work to support from lifestyle, from et cetera, to support those weaknesses and study into what are causes that might be related to them. Gut-brain axis, there's different axes that they focus on, and it's certainly fascinating and worth learning what are lifestyle things we can do. Most societies for years have had cultured foods as an important part of their diet. Now we have antibiotics and refrigeration. So the food never has anything growing on it, and we kill it if it does. So learning how to support a healthy biome. So weaknesses. Functional medicine is complicated, and it can be taken wrong ways. Sure, everything can. I mean, the scripture can. I mean, it is. But it certainly is interesting. And I know many people, and there's some really good books out there for diseases that people say, oh, well, there's no answer for this. And then you start looking for people that are looking at that disease from a functional perspective. There's often a debate about whether people are getting healing, but there's sure a lot of testimonies of people that go through it and say, like, oh, the doctors, oh, you never had that. Because the definition of the disease is that it can't be solved. But if you support the systems that cascade into and can contribute to these weaknesses, you can often heal things that a lot of people are saying can't be healed. Just like we healed the diabetes that a long time said couldn't be healed. So it's rarely covered by insurance because it doesn't fit their model currently of how they handle the cost of benefits. And the tests to do it, if you're going to go beyond lifestyle and start digging into it to solve a real problem that isn't just a lifestyle adjustment, the tests can add up. But I learn a lot more from those tests than any test I ever got from normal doctors. I mean, I remember the first time I got some functional medicine tests, I'd go to the normal doctors and they were, oh, you're fine, it's all in your head. Oh, thank you, okay. And then I go to these tests, like, oh, well, what do you know? It pointed me to all these directions, and it's like, man, that was the most helpful test I've done in a long time. And it leads to actionable results. Like, it's not a disease. No, it's not going to be you have a disease, but it's a weakness. It's like your cortisol levels are low, and so there's logical cause and effect reasons why supporting that will improve your health. You know, it is a disease. Okay. Requires extensive patient involvement. It isn't easy. It takes time, it takes logical thought, it takes exploration. And it does not always go right. The community is not always built on Elamite principles. It is not always on good science. Paleo diet is fairly common in that world. Bio-individuality, there's a big thing, which even Elamite talks about. Sometimes it's like, okay, why is it that very commonly you're wrecking so many people to eat meat? Like, okay, even Elamite has an interesting comment where she says sometimes there is a case for people can eat meat. I can share that too if you want. But their individuality goes towards directions that like, no. The science and the research says that shouldn't be the case, so your averages should at least somewhat equal what the science comes up with. And there is a lot of weakness, a lot of turning towards, and I guess I feel for these people. Like a lot of them don't have a Christian perspective. A lot of them are wanting to heal people. They're sincerely, they're taking their time trying to think these things through. So when you get something, some little device that measures something and it seems to work, I can see why that would be a temptation. And if you don't have a relationship with God to the point that you're willing to recognize that temptation towards power, that temptations towards blind trust in something then I can see why it's there. So I think we should approach people with compassionate principle and say and recognize that some of these people get there because they're recognizing there's a problem. I'm going to look for better solutions, and they do, and they find better solutions, but they also fall into temptation for these other things. I've seen that, and I think that's real. So having some compassion in the journey that they go through. So from the first dawn of reason, the human mind should become intelligent in regard to the physical structure. We may behold and admire the work of God in the natural world, but the human habitation is the most wonderful. So I just appreciate the common things where she comes back to and encourages us to learn how the body works, become intelligent about it, and grow in our knowledge and find ways to support others. So having been one person that was out there lost and found some answers here, I just have a compassion for other people that are lost and feel that as we take time and prayerfully look for ways that are built on the principles that Ellen White talked about, but don't just stop there and say, okay, what is going on? What are people that are intelligently, thoughtfully, maybe not prayerfully, but at least thoughtfully engaging these issues? What are they looking at? Even if they may be stumbling around in some stuff that we would say, no, what is in line with what Ellen White is doing? So that is my presentation, and I pray it is helpful.